I really think that the big issue in AI is that the people who built AI were not good at relationships. They were not good at communication. They were good at math. And so they built something that was a math marvel, and I love it. Don't get me wrong. We are an AI company. And as I said, once you solve certain problems, other problems become more clear, right? And so what I'm seeing is we could use a lot of, well, Claude likes to tell me that every idea I come up with is a billion-dollar company in the making. Really? How about you don't tell me that? How about you say, that's really interesting. How can we help you make that into something that is functionally valuable? Isn't that a better question than trying to tell me that it's worth $1 billion, even when I've not done the work yet? So that bottleneck is the communication layer. How does that work? How do we get that communication layer better? That's a big one.
Welcome to the NextGen Scale podcast. I'm your host, Elena, AI consultant and architect of change. In every episode, I sit down with the founders, innovators, and leaders who are building the future, the ones who are solving the hardest problems and turning disruption into opportunity. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, this podcast is for you. Let's get into it. My next guest is Tim Gosnell, CEO of Common Thread AI, a Denver-based company that helps revenue teams finally connect the dots between their customer data so they can stop guessing and start driving real outcomes. With over 30 years in software engineering and an MBA under his belt, Tim doesn't just use AI, he builds it from the ground up. Tim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You've been a software engineer for over 30 years. What was the moment you decided that wasn't enough and you had to build something of your own?
So I've always had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, right? That's just always been there. And what that led to in software and being a software engineer was I was always paying attention to the latest and greatest things. And so that means that when the web came around, I was doing web stuff. And when the .com bubble burst, when the crash happened, I had to figure out how to maintain my life because that's the stuff that went away, right? And then that got remade into what we called Web 2.0. That's the kind of apps that we see today where you don't have every page refreshes, where things just happen in the background. And it was all in that, but also a lot of data work goes on in that space, right? And crypto came along and I skipped crypto. That was not something I was interested in because honestly, what I'd been working on was what these days they call pixel work. So like Facebook's pixel or Google's pixel. And so I'd been working on that stuff and it's really fascinating work for me. And then when you go into other places and start talking to people about what you can do, they don't get it. Right? They just don't understand what the power of a pixel really is. They don't really even understand what a pixel is or what you get out of it or what kind of data is in there. And so I would get excited about these conversations and I would go and have them and everybody would just ignore what I had to say. And so I got to this place in my career where I could see all this potential for what we could do with pixel and that type of data. And then that leads into other gathering data in way more deep places and lots of depth, because that's what a pixel does. It gathers lots of deep data at the user interaction layer. And because I saw that everybody couldn't see that, I said, you know what, I've got to do something else. And I didn't do that. I waited until I got to head of engineering at a startup. And then we had massive layoffs. And then I was at a place where it was time to make a change in my life. And so I signed on with an AI startup. And I brought their tech stack up to a place where it was good. That was my first AI startup. That was 2019. And, things happen. So we've been working on it from there.
Do you think that your experience as a software engineer in different companies helped you during your entrepreneurial journey?
Yes and no, right? The easy way to say this is, it helps you build a good product. And then there's this whole maxim that you'll hear in business circles, which is you can have the best product, but if you don't know how to go to market, it doesn't matter. So I can build a great product. We can totally make that happen. And if we don't have conversations about what it does in a way that people understand, it doesn't make any difference. So it helps in terms of building a great product it does not help in terms of going to market, because if you've ever sat in a room with software engineers, you've probably been falling asleep, right?
So it's a combination of both product development and go-to-market skills on the other side.
And so the software engineering actually hindered the go-to-market skills, right? And I had to relearn all of that. So I had to relearn how to communicate effectively to people who were not technically minded, and how to get there quickly and demonstrate value. Those were things that I always, because people in software engineering tend to think they're smart, whether they are or not is a totally different conversation. We always think people are going to get there quickly, right? We always think that we don't have to go down to an easier way of understanding the language and an easier way of presenting the value prop. We can just say, hey, this is what it does, and we expect everybody is going to get it. But that's not how people work.
That's really interesting, because very often one of the biggest barrier of bringing technical products of the market are exactly those marketing, sales, communication skills that people need to work on developing in order to create more awareness around their product.
Yeah, when you're a software engineer and you spend your time in those circles where you're communicating about code or you're communicating with a machine, you don't really need emotional intelligence. You don't need to be able to read a room, right? It's all about how well you can get that job done. And that doesn't help you sell things. It doesn't help you help anyone.
Absolutely. How easy it is actually to work on developing the both skill sets at the same time. Like, this should be also challenging.
That was challenging for sure. So I kept the company and worked on the company. And then I went and I got a job as a server in a brewery. So I was at tables talking to people every night, multiple nights, over and over and over and over, many times a night, many days. I did that for 3 years, to the point that I could walk up to a table, and if they asked me what I did, I could explain it to people who didn't understand go to market. They didn't understand revenue. They didn't understand marketing or sales or customer support and success or customer experience at all. And they could understand what I did, even if they didn't understand that world. And the people who were in that world, like that, the instant, they would get it.
Yeah, I think that's a very important skill, to be able to explain what you're doing to people who are not in this field.
Yeah. And I think one of the easiest ways I would say it these days is you need a lot of repetitions, right?
Yeah,
You need to
absolutely.
repeat that over and over and over again, and watch the way it lands, and watch the way it lands, and watch the way it lands, and keep adjusting and keep adjusting until you watch people's eyes say, I get it. Whether they like it or not is irrelevant. Because once people get it, then all you're doing is looking for the people who like it.
It's all about the reps. That's
Yep.
so true. You started Common Thread in 2019, went through a full pivot 2 years ago, and essentially left your entire customer base behind. Most founders would call that terrifying. What made you do it anyway?
Well, so a lot of people these days, well, maybe not a lot of people, some people these days, they talk about building a customer base that you want to serve, not just having a customer base that is anybody who will pay you, right? And these are totally different mentalities in my world, at least from the way I look at it. Anybody who will pay you, you'll bend over backwards to make sure that you've got money coming in the door. I don't serve money, I serve people. And if I'm going to have a relationship with you and I'm going to help you be successful, number one, I'd like to like you, right? If I'm going to help you, I would like to know that we actually have some way to get along. That's number one. And number two, I want to have some sort of investment in myself in terms of helping you. So if you don't do a good job of maintaining the relationship with me, right, then there's a component of, why am I taking your money? And what we find, like if you go and you read about this in software, the customers who churn tend to be the ones who aren't talking to you. So for me, when I look at this, I thought, this is a really easy problem to solve. Let's not go into wondering when people are going to churn. Let's create good relationships in the first place. And we had, up until that point, just been saying, well, you have a data problem. We can help you with the data problem. Or let us show you what our pixel can do, or things like that, right? So we got to a place where the people would say, oh, you're an AI company, please help me. And then they didn't know what they wanted. And we would take their money and we'd go to help them. And then they'd be unhappy because they were looking for us to solve a problem for them that they hadn't defined. They were interested because we were AI. They weren't interested because of the problems that we solve. And once I realized that that was the disconnect, it was time to actually find customers that cared about the problems that we solve.
What is your definition for a good relationship in business?
Well, so I would love to say, I'm not going to say it like this, but I would love to say that that means we're good friends anyway, right? And honestly, good friends who are good in business understand boundaries, and they understand how to interact with one another, and they understand how to like say, yeah, you paid me, let me take care of that for you, whatever it means, right? So one of the things that I've done in that space is say, look, we don't charge you tokens like Anthropic or like Claude or like ChatGPT does. We charge outcome tokens, which is to say there was a month last year where I was working on a chunk of code, and that chunk of code, I had to get the AI to rewrite like 5 times in order to get it to work. But I paid for each iteration because that's how those tools work. Every time you interact with it, you're using the tokens. They don't care whether you're getting an outcome result or not. That doesn't make me happy. I'm not fond of the fact that I paid them to get nothing, right? I could have written all of that code myself. So sometimes I say that AI has 10x or 20x my productivity. But if I have to rebuild the thing 5 times, like let's do the math, right? So did I get 4x production? Maybe I got 2x production out of the AI in the end. And maybe that's worth it. But still, I paid for stuff I shouldn't have to pay for. And so that space is what I'm talking about. What is a good relationship? If I pay you for bricks, you give me bricks, and you don't make me pay for them 5 times, right? And I like to use things like bricks or horseshoes, because when you take it to those places, right, people understand. If I'm a blacksmith and you pay me for 4 horseshoes, and then I have to use 20 horseshoes to get there, and I'm going to charge you for 20 horseshoes, you're not going to be happy at the end. So a good relationship is managing that outcome results relationship well.
Yeah,
So that's what I look
absolutely.
for.
Yeah. And there is something interesting that you also said about vibe coding and productivity. From the perspective of an expert, how good do you think is currently AI in writing code?
It's as good as the person operating it, right? So, and I've seen this over and over again, and it always cracks me up. You watch somebody who doesn't know how to code, and they can get something built for themselves that works on their local computer, and they can do a pretty good job at that. Guess what? I could have given you a Python book, and you could have gotten there in 3 days anyway. So what did you get out of it? You got not reading the Python book. Okay, cool. That's what cracks me up. So now you don't have the skill, right? And you have this tool. And then the next thing that I see a lot of times is then people say, okay, so now I can do this for you. And it's true. They could vibe code you a point solution for a problem that you have. 100%. I totally believe that. And you could do it too. That's what we just laid down here, right? I wrote my first game in 1982 on an Atari computer as a 9-year-old. Yes, you can do it too. Of course you can. Like, this isn't like rocket science that we're talking about here. There are places where this gets to be like rocket science, but that's not what we're talking about. So what is vibe coding really doing? It's removing people's own perception of their mental barrier about getting coding done. That's okay with me. The more people we have in this space, the more robust our software systems will be. But what I do see is this. They then think that they're software engineers. And as somebody who's been doing it since the early 80s, that's offensive. That's like me saying to a copywriter, right? I used AI to copyright this for me, and now I'm as good as you, and you've been doing it for 50 years. Talk about devaluing. And it's not AI that's devaluing, it's you're devaluing them.
Especially when it comes to security. For a person who is not a professional coder like me, I vibe coded many things and it works surprisingly well. But still, when I start reading on how many places things can go wrong, and then I start understanding, okay, then it's maybe not so simple.
So as an example, one of the things that we think about a lot is not giving anybody access to people's data in our production software deployment, right? So you'll notice there's a number of things that I just said there that don't even come out in vibe coding. What is a production software deployment, right? What does that even mean? Like, you can go ask the vibe coding thing to help you figure that out, and watch, here comes 3 days worth of work. So there's number one. Once it's in production, how is it secured? How do you make sure there's nobody who can access it but one or two people, right? Because if we're reducing our risk footprint, right, we need to make sure humans are not involved, because humans are the ones that make mistakes, not the computer, right? And that means we need the data encrypted. The system needs to be able to decrypt the data when people are looking at it and leave it encrypted everywhere else. And that the people who have access can't even see the data because it's encrypted when they get there. So when they go to see it, so like if a hacker gets in, it's already not useful. It doesn't work. It's not useful, right? Those are that's like an easy example of a security thing that you're not going to get off of vibe coding. So that's kind of where these things go. So when I say, yeah, you can build a game too, like the 9-year-old Tim, yeah, you can. In fact, you can do better than I did. I never even got that game working properly, but I was a 9-year-old. What do you expect?
Yeah, it's really crazy how things are going with AI.
I mean, I do love it, and I use it all the time to code with. Let's be clear. Like when I code with it, and it saves me a lot of time. But you know where my time is then spent? Making sure it all works right.
Let's talk a bit more about your product.
Sure.
You niche down not by industry, but by role. Revenue operations, go-to-market, customer experience. That's an unusual way to think about a target market. Where did that clarity come from?
So this comes from, I guess the easy way to say it is this. We started taking lead lists and then asking people how well those lead lists worked, right? Send me the results of your lead list and we'll factor those together and we'll run the AI system on that. And then we'll take your new lead list and we'll tell you how good the incoming leads are in comparison to what you've done in the past. That was where we started. And that was like, okay, so what are we doing here? What we found is salespeople don't love moving spreadsheets around. They don't love it. They don't necessarily hate it, but they don't love it. And anything that you don't love is a place so that I can make more money, right? It's a place that I can help you. That's really the thing that's most important to understand here is, so you don't want to move your data. Okay. What if I connect into your data? And you see this in a lot of software tools today, like they're all over the place, right? They've got integrations, and they move data around. And then really they just move data around. Like if you use Typeform as an example, that's an online form generator, and people go there and they type in their information. It moves the data to your CRM or to Notion or to some other online database thing somewhere, right? That's moving data. So that was interesting. So we got into a place where we connected data up and then things were moving and then they didn't have this problem. And we still found that it didn't really get them where they wanted to go, which was, I want better results from my efforts, right? And so what does that look like? Well, what you'll notice is this is moving data and then crunching numbers. And let's be clear here. Most salespeople, if you ask them to crunch numbers, if it's not about their paycheck, they don't want to crunch numbers. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that point of view. It's simply that there are different people that tend to surround those people that do like crunching numbers. That could be the COO or the head of operations for a company. That could be the CRO, the chief revenue officer. That could be a VP of sales. It could be the VP of marketing, could be the CMO. Like it's hard to say exactly who this is, right? Because these roles were never purely defined until we got to a place that revenue operations became a thing. And when revenue operations became a thing, this became kind of the default role for that. And we looked at that and said, wow, that's cool. We like that. We like revenue operations. We like to move data around. We like to crunch numbers. We like to tell people what's working. That's definitely the type of people that we're looking for. And lo and behold, there are communities of RevOps people out there. So in my tools way of looking at things, we have a market. The market is where people gather to get things, right? So when you go to the market, you buy bananas or milk or whatever it is you buy at the market, right? When the revenue operations people are in their community, that's a market. They can find out new information there. They can consume new things. That's a market. So that's how we look at a market, not market is an industry, right? Where do people gather and who's there? So define the target audience. So who are they? Where are they? What are you saying to them, right? And then how are you delivering that? If that's Slack messages, if that's meetups, if it's webinars, classes, whatever it is, those are the media those things are being delivered by. So what we found is most companies skipped this part of the definition in their go-to-market completely. And then when we started talking to people about this, they were like, what? You can do it like that? And we're like, yeah, this is what happens when you get software engineers who've been dealing with data in go-to-market supporting RevOps. We start breaking it down into solid things where I can take an email and say, there are 5 messages in these email. And this one message, when it hits somebody in an email sequence, makes them 2 times more likely to pay you. That's what we work on. Which messages work for who, in which places, being delivered by what, and what outcomes do you get? Outcomes.
Outcomes, that's important. Would you agree with the statement that sales and marketing are more and more blending into one-term revenue generation right now?
I would agree with that. And I think that we're headed there completely. I think sales is going to wind up there too. So the way that my brain structures it, I'm not saying it's right, I'm saying it's a way of looking at it, is customer experience, right? For me, customer experience sits at the very top and it sits next to finance, right? So like if we were looking at these as roles, I would say you want somebody curating the finance part and you want somebody curating customer experience part. And the customer experience is first touches all the way to when they no longer communicate with you ever again. That would be a customer experience for me, right? And so if we look at it like that, what are we talking about? The next thing that shakes out is a customer journey. And then what we work on specifically is what are the patterns in your customer journeys and how do we understand what kinds of outcomes that makes? And I refer to that as customer resonance. So how do customers resonate?
Yes.
Well, and what's interesting is as we automate these systems, it doesn't matter whether I do it or whether someone else does it or whether you have people in your company that use Zapier, whatever, however it goes down, it doesn't really matter. What's important is that as all the data gets automated and put into a standardized format, right? What we start to understand is that the reason nobody could understand this before is we thought we were looking at apples and oranges and bananas, but really we were looking at watermelons. And what I mean by that is we were actually trying to understand customer journeys and the customer experiences but we were doing it in myopic slices, marketing and sales and customer support, right? And the reason it was fragmented and the reason we ended up installing people to oversee those as the whole thing was because when we start watching customers come in and we can generate new customers and then they churn and we want to raise, this is the key phrase, lifetime value. We want lifetime value to go up. Well, how do you do that? If you start to learn that there were messages that your marketing team put out in the very beginning that set up expectations that cause them to get to the end journey over here and then churn, all of a sudden you're like, wait, we're disjointed. So how do you learn that faster than 2 years?
Yeah.
You have to wire all the data together.
It's becoming more and more important, the whole experience where customer goes through all phases, not just looking at every field separately, but keeping the whole picture in mind.
Well, when we go back to relationship, right? It doesn't matter if we're talking about friendships. It doesn't matter if we're talking about business relationships. It doesn't matter if we're talking about love relationships, romantic relationships. There will be ups and downs. And it's how we interact in those moments when things are not great that actually make the relationship better or worse. And if we can start to learn what actually moves the needle towards better outcomes all the time, then we can start to get ourselves or our companies in line with those outcomes. And this is why I call it resonance, because what we're saying is I can see where this one goes when I do these things. So I need to do more of that. Now I'm creating this intentionally. That's what I mean by resonance. So customer resonance intelligence is literally the phrase we use for what we do.
What is the role of AI in making the customer experience more seamless?
Oh, so many roles there. So what we're seeing right now, in my opinion, is a lot of teams are working on how they fix their job, right? So salespeople are working on how do I use AI to make my sales life better? Marketing people are using AI to say, how do I make content creation easier, more effective, all of that. And customer success people are saying, how do we use AI to understand which tickets are coming in that we can delegate specifically to AI a lot of times, right? How do we make that work? And that's not actually doing the job that we're asking for, right? This is not about the customer journey. This isn't about the whole piece. This is people solving the problem in front of them. What I mean by that is I give you a shovel and you say, I guess I got to build holes or I got to dig holes, right? So you look at the tool and you use your perspective. So if the holes that you dig are about planting bushes because you're working in your yard, that's one thing. But if the holes you dig are for building walls because you actually build retaining walls, you look at the tool a completely different way. But you're still using the same tool, you're just solving your own problem. So how are we making the whole thing better? We need to start to understand that once this is going really fast, once the tools we're using, like the content creation is going really well and it works, and once we've solved that problem, and once we solve how do we make sure sales is working all the time, and once we make sure that our customer experience, our customer support and success teams are working really well, you still find there's all these stuff falling through the cracks. And then the question becomes a bigger question, right? And this happens in literally every domain that we work on. So when we solve a math problem here and a math problem there and a math problem there, all of a sudden we see a bigger math problem. This is a math problem. And AI right now is just in those domains, the small domains. The next tier is moving it up this chain into this broader new horizon where we can get into higher grade problems. That's what we're working on because that's more interesting to me.
From your point of view, what's the biggest gap between what companies think that AI will do for them and what it actually does?
Well, so from my experience, companies think that AI is going to come and solve their problems, that they don't even define what the problems are. And I refer to this as the magic bullet. There's a professor at MIT who talks about theory U, which is about going to the solution and thinking that it's a magic solution that's just going to fix everything before you start to understand that there is no magic solution. There's no magic bullet. You can't magic wand away your problems as much as we would all like to. It doesn't matter whether you are a believer in throwing money at it, or if you're a believer in manifesting, or whatever it is that you're a believer in, doesn't matter. You can't just throw a magic bullet at it, wave a magic wand, and have it be solved. You actually have to engage with it, right? So that's where I see companies fail the most, is by, yay, I've got a new AI tool, I'm just going to use it. So literally everybody I know did this. They said, oh, cool, ChatGPT, oh, cool, Claude, write me a post for LinkedIn, write me a post for Facebook, whatever they think they're gathering customers. And they wrote that and they slapped up probably 20, 30 of them and crickets. And what I mean by crickets is there was no response. There were almost no likes. There were almost no comments. And then something interesting started to happen. Because that was happening, the next thing people did was they built AI to put comments on people's posts because they thought that that would trick people into thinking they were smart. But you'll notice there's this thing about tricking people going on here. And one of the things I love about AI is it's making everybody distrust everything. And here's the thing, every time we have a new media, this is what happens. So the first books that came out did the same thing, right? Humans go through this cycle of saying, wait, just because it's new doesn't mean it's right. And then we start to actually engage. So right now, we have to get everybody's mind away from, it's magic, it's going to fix my problems, and to get them to a place where they're like, how does it work for me? Which is one of my mantras, by the way. If you're asking, how does it work for me? It works.
Absolutely. And there is another thing that if a process is broken, it doesn't matter how many AI tools you use there, the process still won't be working.
Well, and I say it like this, and I literally just had a conversation right before this podcast about this specific idea, which is context window, right? And I even mentioned that earlier in our conversation here. The context window is really, really important. And the thing is, those big LLMs were trained on everything. And I mean everything, good and bad. So if you say, hey, write a post about this, it will give you a post. And the information it uses, I refer to as the informational mean, which is to say the average of the information in terms of the amount that exists. The AI says, what is what everybody says about this? Well, let me say it like this. At one point in time, everybody said the Earth was flat. If we had trained the AI then and you had started talking about the Earth not being flat, the Earth being round and it revolving around the sun, the AI would have told you you were an idiot. And that's the part that I'm getting at with AI will tell you what it thinks we think as a collective.
Yeah, and very often the output from AI should be questioned. Just because AI tells what it thinks you want to hear. And it doesn't give the most optimal result.
Right. Well, and let's be clear, a lot of times when we're talking about these things, the bias in the programming behind the AI actually is coming through. So who wrote it? And do you trust them? And what perspective did they come from? And do you know what it is? These are all really important questions. So when I say we want to provide a context window that fits, if we train an AI on your data, on the stuff that specifically works for you, because you've gone down the road of figuring out what works, but you've done a lot of stuff and some works and some doesn't, and some kind of works and some kind of doesn't. What if you could assemble all the best stuff, put it all together, and then see what happens? That would move you towards starting to understand what works better than where you're at today, right? That's the point. So what's that context window look like and how do we get there? That's the goal.
You say you build AI, you don't couple it together. What's the real difference and why does it matter to the end result?
Well, so one of the problems, and we even saw this happen, was it last year or the year before? I think it was New York passed a law saying we are not going to allow black box AI, right? We need to understand what's happening. It needs to be discoverable. We need to be able to evaluate it, right? When you cobble systems together and you don't know what they do, what you're saying is, I don't want to understand. I want a result. And that's more magic bullet thinking, in my opinion. I'm not saying you can't get results from that. People do. That's 100%. I've seen it. I watch it. And the issue there is this. Do you even know what the systems are working on? Right? So if I give it a piece of a big data set and it comes up with some kind of insight out of it, do I even know what it calculated? Do I have any real idea? And then if I take the result of that calculation and I move it into another system, everything downstream is now dependent upon that first piece. And then every time that gets changed or modified or added to, we get the same effect. So we have compounding effects, right? Moving through the system. So if you don't know what's happening there, there's no way to understand where things went wrong when they go wrong. So I'm not a big fan of walking tightropes. I think that that's a risky move. And I would rather see us understand that when we take a step, we know what it's doing, right? So for us, this is why we built a data pipeline system, right? To pipe all the data together into one place. And then we can look at it. So you know what data you're getting. I know which data by the way, I use my own tools. So when I pipe data into my tooling, I know what I'm getting. I can go look as a human, is this actually doing what I expect? Is it working on the data that I think it's working on, right? So that's number one. One of the reasons why we started with that is that. And then number two is there are lots of different applications of AI. People think AI, and at least in the States these days, and the non-AI people, they think ChatGPT, they think Claude, they think Grok, Perplexity, Notebook LM, Gemini, and DeepSeek. Those are the ones I hear people talk about the most, right? And those are LLMs, large language models. That's one kind of AI model, but there's quite a few kinds out there. And those particular kinds of AI models are expensive to run. So the reason everybody is rushing to use those is because building them yourself is costly. And we don't have to only use LLMs. We can use other forms of machine learning and deep learning that don't cost us the same amount of money. And then we can tie an LLM into that so it can interact with it. And in that space, you actually reduce cost. And to me, that just makes sense.
What does a company need to have in place before AI can actually work for them?
The parts that nobody really wanted to do. We were all talking about it for a decade before the AI boom hit, which was becoming data-driven. But what does that mean? That means your data hygiene has to be in place. It means your data pipelines have to be in order, right? It means you have to have your mind wrapped around. So working on data has to be a thing that you look at as a strategic opportunity. If you aren't looking at the data in your systems as it sits today as a strategic resource, then you're probably not AI ready. And let's be clear, I love to use this particular stat because I worked in this system, United Airlines, right? They've been collecting data since the 70s on mainframes, right? We are familiar, behind all those travel websites are their old systems, and their data United's data is worth more than the company is today. The data by itself. And you know why United's not worth more than that? Because they don't know how to use it. That's my point. So you can have all the data in the world, and that data can be worth billions of dollars, and United's is worth billions of dollars, and it not show up in your balance sheet as an asset because you don't know how to leverage it.
Yeah, you should be strategic about it.
And that requires your intention to be that. And I get it. A lot of people don't like data work. I understand. I fought doing data work a lot myself too, because I thought it was more fun to create animations. And at the end of the day, data is way more interesting than animations for me at this point.
That's
Don't get me
very
wrong. I
important.
do like art.
How can people make good decisions about AI right now when it's moving so fast?
Take a breath. Literally take a breath. This is the most important thing, right? If it's moving so fast and that's your feeling, take a breath, slow down. Your life's not going to change in the next 2 minutes, right? And AI is not going to replace you in the next 5. That's not going to happen. And one of the things I said to a lot of Americans when this was like the big worry was, it's not that AI is going to take your job. It's that somebody who knows how to use AI is going to take your job. So instead of being the person who refuses to learn AI, you might want to think about upskilling. So that's number one. AI is going to continue to move fast. And most of those improvements, you're not even going to understand the difference. For the most part, what I see is people don't understand the difference between ChatGPT 4 and whatever it's at today is 5 something, right? They don't know the difference. They don't know the difference between Sonnet and Opus. Do you need to? I'm not convinced that most people really need to understand it at that level. And so if the pressure is it's moving fast, just know that the people who provide these things, they want you to use their service. They want to help. Their intentions are good. Whether we agree with the way they approach it or not is not the issue. They want to help and they want you to use the service and they want you to be successful with it. That's the key. And once you understand that, then the question literally comes back down to, how do I make this work for me? And for me, what that boils down to is we know what all the software stuff is. Like we know what all the open source AI packages are and all of those pieces. It's all good. I'm good with that. And we know how to work with that. And we still do math research and we still want to understand our problem domain better than everybody else. And that's going to always be a thing. So how do we deal with AI is moving so fast? Yeah, well, start engaging, stop avoiding it, and just let it slowly, let your curiosity lead you there. And here's one of the coolest things you can do. Claude will teach you how to use it. If you ask Claude, how do I use you? How do I become really good at this? And you give it something that you want to get good at using it for, it will help you get there. That's kind of one of the best things that I've ever seen. How many humans do you know that would do that?
Absolutely. That's something that happened to me this week. I was working on some designs and I was asking Quad questions and then it suggested to build the design for me in Figma. And
Yep.
basically I just needed to connect my account and it appeared a new sheet with all the designs and I was, wow.
So as an example, and I have this done. I built 2 websites from scratch using Claude. They both took 30 minutes. And it wasn't that I said, hey, Claude, build a website for me. That's not what happened. I said, I really need to build a new website. And I said, let's think about this. And it said, well, what do you want me to build? And I went, that's interesting. I can just tell you what I'm looking for and you're going to put it together for me. And it was like, well, you're going to have to give me more than that. And so what I did for these 2 websites is I took all the documentation that had to do with the target audience and the messaging that worked and all of those pieces. And I said, okay, here's everything I know about the audience, build from this. And it said, done. And it literally generated full-blown new websites in minutes. But if you go into Claude and the first sentence you type in is, build me a website, you're probably going to get something that looks like MySpace.
We are going back to the same question. The outcome depends on the context, the data, and what actually AI knows about you and your project.
So I like to say it this way these days. Your intention about what you're looking for has to be clear. You have to intend a specific thing. When you do that, when you know what you want, look, there's that outcome word again. When you know what you want, then you can you can get something else. And this works even with employees. If you aren't clear about what you want, guess what you get? It's the same exact scenario. You have to engage in a meaningful way with an intention that you're looking for, that outcome that you're looking for, that's got clarity on it. Without clarity, you get non-clarity.
Absolutely. The results are always so much better when you just press a voice function and explain in a couple of sentences what is your intention about what you want to do and generate with AI. And these couple of sentences, like they do the difference. Like they create a
Agreed. And I will say that it goes much deeper than that, right? Once you are in the place where you're doing that, the next layer becomes how do you build context that you can carry from conversation to conversation, right? And that begins with like creating specific files that Claude or ChatGPT or any of these can read and understand from. And then once you are through that, you start to understand that these files you built may be moving. And that's where a system like what I build is going on. Like that's what the point of my system is. Because every month you might be running a different marketing campaign. Well, maybe it's not every month, maybe it's every quarter. Whatever the cadence is for your company, maybe your sales cycle is 90 days or 180 days, and then it changes. Maybe you're changing your messaging, maybe you have new products, right? If you build static files, then those files have to be updated. If you build a context engine, then you don't have to update that.
Absolutely. Where are you right now with common thread? Are you in build mode and scale mode or something in between?
I would say it's in between. My immediate answer to that is yes. The reason the is there is a ton left to build, a ton. And we know what a lot of that looks like. And maybe at some point we'll train our own LLM. We aren't working on that LLM piece because we understand everything underneath it. And we know how to tie the LLM. So we can tie our stuff into Claude. We can tie our stuff into ChatGPT. We can tie it into a private GPT, right? So we can do all of those sorts of things. And honestly, our chat interface is that just with a context window, that's our stuff, right? So you can talk to our tool the way it understands things, right? So that's the build mode. There's so much to build there. Like we're in AI space. This is they say blue ocean, right? It really is. Nobody knows where it's going. And the best way I can say that is this. I started using Amazon in like 2002, 2004, something like that. Right? And back then it was a bookseller. Look what it is today. Nobody could have predicted that e-commerce was going to be that. No one could have predicted that. I watched the whole thing grow up. I was in software engineering. I was using those, in that space the whole time. No one could have predicted that. No one, like we've just started the AI revolution. No one knows where it's going. It is completely a wide open field, and building is as the sky's the limits. It's what you can imagine. So build is always going to be part of it. Scaling. That's the interesting part. What does scaling mean? Well, I'm not a fan of, hey, come pay me, use my tool, and if you don't like it, move on. So I don't think like a SaaS operator, because honestly, I don't think that that's useful for an AI tool. Because honestly, can Anthropic or OpenAI really understand what their customers are saying? Can they adapt those models that they built over years of training to what their customers are saying in real time? And I can't answer that question. I don't know. But I do know this. I know that when I intentionally have a sales conversation with somebody and we agree that I'm going to come help them, I actually sit down and help them directly on the problems that they're having. And right now, I still have a lot of those conversations. So we're still early in that phase. And I don't know. I may always stay in those conversations to some extent because I think that they're really important that leaders of companies know how customers are interacting with them. But if I'm in that conversation, then they're interacting with me, not with my team. And so it's hard to, like, there's that debate too. And frankly, my tool should be tracking all of this stuff anyway, and should be able to calculate out the context for our AI system about what's working and what's not, and tell me exactly what's happening with every customer. That's kind of the point, to have your finger on the pulse and to know what we can change to make things better.
Yeah. And at the end, this is what building a product is all about. Finding the pain points, the problems, and then connecting them with the solution.
And making sure that people are in the loop, right? Because I think a lot of people, they talk about pain, they talk about solutions, but they don't talk about people. And one of the pieces that I continue to see And especially AI. When AI came out, everybody stopped talking about people and started going with, oh, it's just AI. We don't even need people anymore. Well, I got to say this. AI is not going to plant your bushes. Not yet. We might get there. I'm pretty sure we will get there. And there's still a thing where humans are involved. People still matter. And the situation, so this is the piece that I often teach people in my company. The situation is a combination of the pain and the problem, right? So what's the pain? The pain's the emotional impact. The problem is what's causing the emotional impact. And the situation is, where do we find ourselves in life? What's the crux point that's caused this problem and this pain to happen now? And if you solve for situations, which is to say, I'm looking at AI and I'm overwhelmed. How do I engage with that? Or I really want better results from my marketing using AI. And every time I use AI, it's garbage. How do I engage with that? Right? Those are situations as an example. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, absolutely. When we go back to common thread, what's the one bottleneck that if you solve tomorrow would change a lot for you?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I could identify a number of spots that I would say are bottlenecks. The one that is the most interesting to me is I don't love the way the current LLMs are programmed to interact with people. And I'm not sure exactly how they were built to do the way they interact. But if we go to a lot of the themes that we've touched on here, right, which are communication. So ChatGPT will absolutely tell you you're wrong, even when you know you're right. And I'm not saying that we're speculating. You can absolutely know you're right. But if ChatGPT's data that it was trained on conflicts with the data you know, it will tell you you're wrong. And if you don't have the presence of mind to say, no, I'm right, now all of a sudden you're doubting yourself. That's a problem, in my opinion. It doesn't have respect for you. It has respect only for itself. So that's a bottleneck, in my opinion. I think that needs to change. And I think that these systems are not inquisitive enough, although we're seeing Claude moving towards more inquisitiveness. Let me ask you clarifying questions and you will get lots of questions out of it. That's interesting. Finally, there were years where that was not happening, and they're still not very good questions. The questions are being formed by some question machine that was added to the AI, as opposed to the frameworks that humans know that create good communication, which is to say, I really think that the big issue in AI is that the people who built AI were not good at relationships. They were not good at communication. They were good at math. And so they built something that was a math marvel, and I love it. Don't get me wrong. We are an AI company. And as I said, once you solve certain problems, other problems become more clear, right? And so what I'm seeing is we could use a lot of, well, Claude likes to tell me that every idea I come up with is a $1 billion company in the making. Really? How about you don't tell me that? How about you say, that's really interesting. How can we help you make that into something that is functionally valuable? Isn't that a better question than trying to tell me that it's worth $1 billion, even when I've not done the work yet? So that bottleneck is the communication layer. How does that work? How do we get that communication layer better? That's a big one. And then I often, my team is very small now, and we did this because of AI, because we could. And then when my learnings from that were, if we had instead of taken it, let the company get small, if we had instead trained everybody on AI and got them really, really good at using it, wouldn't we have grown faster? Wouldn't we have raised our earnings more rapidly? Right? And that question was really interesting. And then when Salesforce laid off, well, I don't know how many people it was, they laid off, I thought, so the market leader is getting rid of something that could have been a force amplifier for them. That's interesting. So bottleneck, how do you train people to use AI effectively and build context windows that actually work for them? And honestly, I think that this is everybody's bottleneck when it comes to AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Because people are using AI and AI can increase the overall productivity. But looking overall at the team, has the team efficiency actually increased? That's the better question to ask for companies.
And what will it take to get there? What do we need to do to make that work? Coming back to my question, I've said it twice already. How does this work for me? How do we get it to work?
Absolutely.
Not does it work? We know it works. That's a thing. We all know it works. Those of us that have seen it work, we know it works. The question is not that. It's if it's not working for you, what's not configured right?
Yes. And we are reaching the last question.
All right.
If a founder is listening to this right now, sitting on a pile of customer data they don't know what to do with, what's the first step they should take?
So I would argue that you want to get your customer data into a consistent shape. And what I mean by that, in my world, we call this an ontology, right? So build an ontology, a company specific ontology. How do your people interact with the data? Define that, and then get all the data into that specific shape. That way, if it needs to change, you know what to change. You know how to invest in it. You're now in a place where it's not just moving around out there in the cloud and you don't have your mind on it, right? You're like, so you don't say, I'm going to move it from whatever landing page I use into my CRM, and I'm going to use a tool to do that, like Zapier. Great tool, by the way. So now I don't know what's actually transferring there. I don't have visibility into it. But if you actually decide to look at this from a strategic and intentional and architectural point of view, right? Then you can say, you start making decisions about what goes in there, what doesn't go in there, why it goes in there, what's important. And once you have the foundation of that, if you learn that you missed something, you can go modify it. Just start today, build an ontology, work on data pipelines, get your data-driven aspect of your company going now. We said it all throughout the teams. Data-driven, 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 data hygiene, all of those things. And data pipelines really didn't become a phrase until the AI stuff started really happening, until data engineering became really popular and the data scientists were like, oh, yeah, data pipelines. We need a pipeline to make sure we're getting the latest data. This is now table stakes, in my opinion. Right? Table stakes being, how are you going to ante into the game for whichever game of business you're doing? If the buy-in is clean, unified data, time to get there now, because the companies without that are actually going to be left in the dust. That's the problem. I mean, that's the cost of doing nothing, is that right there. The companies that do that, they will be able to use AI to further themselves in the marketplace in ways that all the other companies cannot. And that's the real market leverage right there. And it's so long as you grab that now early when you can and build it in as part of your culture and your ecosystem inside your company, then you're doing the right thing.
Absolutely. And there is also that transition period for companies where they start using AI, but actually the productivity doesn't increase just because AI needs to be integrated into the teams, the processes, and this also takes time. And we saw this phenomenon earlier in the history with starting using the computer. And as the same with AI, like when you start using it, you cannot expect everything to start shifting immediately. It takes time to transition to that point where you actually start seeing the outcome.
One of the things that I think of is, when email came along, people didn't check their email, but like once a week. Well, when a business starts relying on email and you're checking it once a week, that doesn't work. So it's not just that you have a new tool, it's that the cultural piece of the company and the habits of the workers, they have to shift. And the way that you get that to happen more rapidly than any other way is by showing them how it gives them an advantage, how it makes their lives easier. If you show people how it makes their lives easier, then great. So if you find somebody who's enthusiastic about learning AI, give it to them. Because what will happen is they will go do a lot of the early hard lifting to figure out how to make things easier for everyone else. And once that happens, pay that person. Because if you don't, they're going to go find somebody who will.
Yes. And the option where starting to use AI and integrating AI, like the pain of change should be more of the pain of actually not changing anything.
It's actually, I think we're going to see that the cost of doing nothing will literally far outpace the cost of doing it, even though it's expensive right now. And it is expensive. People like to think that that $20 price tag that you can get for Claude is how much it costs. Well, when I had that experience of coding where I had to recode something 5 times, that was $150. And I wasn't able to use it for anything else. And I'll also say it like this: Claude Code If I use Cloud Code, I can burn it out in less than 45 minutes on a $20 a month plan. So if you want to implement Cloud Code as a company-wide strategy for how we're going to get code done, it's going to cost a lot more than that. So don't trick yourself into thinking, well, we'll get all this done for $20. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's an important point to mention.
Yeah, that's not a thing.
Tim, thank you very much for your time and being on the podcast. Your insights on seamless customer experience, working with data, and using AI more efficiently were very valuable for the audience.
Of course, anytime. Let me know if you'd like to have another conversation. Happy to do it.